Hello. Our story begins inside of Vader's personal starfighter. It wasn't fully Imperial, nor was it fully Jedi. The ship was quick, and to the newly created monster, that was all that mattered. The vessel dropped out of hyperspace, and he ran the control yokes forward and launched the afterburners into overdrive. Sight inside the starfighter was hard. Inside the helmet, it was even more challenging. Anakin loved a challenge, so Vader should have to hate a challenge. Or should he not? His head cocked to the side, rejecting the name he had just conjured up like a demon from a past millennium. He spun his vessel to the side, twisting the yokes dedicatedly but with precision. As he was lining up behind the starship he was here to intercept, he received a message from one of his men. His eyes darted down and pressed the console. There were reports of Jedi insurgents not far from his current location. Chances are that they were meeting up so they could continue to build their coalition. Vader shook his head. The Jedi were dull. He repeated the line inside of his head. He told the Imperial officer that their dying breed wouldn't dare meet up. It wasn't within their minds to do something so brave. The old order was dead. In the era of Empire, they wouldn't dare resurrect it, for the sake of the people galaxy-wide. The officer wasn't really sure how to respond, so the officer just steadied his shoulders and very quickly responded to Vader with a very well. Vader was fully moving into his hunting Jedi prime. He had already killed a former Jedi Master, Eth Koth, and he was working his way through survivor ranks. The thought of the Jedi rebuilding themselves was ridiculous as a notion. They wouldn't dare. That word, dare. Their order couldn't sustain combat with the Sith. The reason dare came to mind is because even inside this clunky suit, the one that Vader had made home with, he saw himself and his master as the only true powers in the universe. If the Jedi wanted to make a return, they'd be facing the two most powerful Sith in the galaxy, the two most powerful Sith the galaxy had ever seen. If Sidious believed the notion to be true, then it must be. The dying Anakin inside, the one trying to reconcile with who he had become, was crying out for help, just like the Jedi. Anakin was dying to be freed from this impurity, because the Sith had lied, and this was yet another lie from Palpatine. But Vader, he believed his master, and he trusted him, because without Sidious, there was no Vader. One thing he continued to overlook was the fact that without Sidious, there would be Anakin Skywalker as one whole individual. One that could be changed. One that could be changed later, but why wait until later? Vader heard beeping inside of the cockpit. The vessel he was hunting down was nearing him and he hadn't even realized it. Always looking off to the horizon, a Jedi Master would have said. Vader grabbed the controls with such fierce strength that they started to shatter and splinter apart in his hands. He slammed down on the trigger and watched blaster fire fill the top side of the ship he was chasing down. It rocked from side to side as small bursts of fire shot out before transforming into smoke. He ripped his fighter around as the Jedi vessel started to open fire on him. His eyes scanned the exterior of the ship as he spun the fighter back around. He found the weak spot he was searching for and unloaded everything he had. The starship was an older model, one that the Jedi were clearly using so it couldn't be tracked, due to the older tech, and one that was meant to keep them hidden but not protected. Vader's rounds smashed into the sides of the ship, and it rattled to the devastating blow. The Dark Lord shoved the yokes all the way down and buzzed the bridge of the ship, to alert the Jedi that they were next. Inside, the surviving knights looked to each other, and made the decision to get to the escape pods now. They were at their location. Hopefully one of them could get to the surface of the planet and alert the others. The starfighter sped around the backside of the unshielded ship. Vader piloted the fighter back, flipping the engines off and turning them back on to get the ship to rotate at maximum speed. He flipped the engines back on and his head jolted back, just a little, but it didn't stop him from focusing. His eyes found the engines, and before he knew it, they were detonated. Inside the ship, the Jedi ran to their escape pods. They didn't have a second to spare. The overhead lights were bright and illuminating, as the eldest quickly relayed orders to his brothers and sisters, Erodian Togruta, Iridonian Zabrak, and the human. As they were rushing to the escape pods, the lights started to flicker, and it felt like the ground began to shake until a thud rocked the entire ship. The Jedi all stopped in their tracks, perplexed that the beast had gotten to them so soon. They readied their weapons, and Vader from the other end rose to his feet. The Jedi charged in, and as they did, Vader raised his hand choking the Iridonian Zabrak. While they were in mid-air, Vader blocked a strike from the Togruta, holding them at bay as he finished off one life with a twist of his hand. Vader swung forward and parried a strike from the human Jedi. knocking them back as he had the Togruta. Vader's hand shot out. The final Jedi was left at Vader's mercy, but there was no mercy in the dark side of the Force. The body dropped and Vader stood in silence. He always found these moments to be a little awkward. What does one do after murdering someone? Well, he supposed that it was time to murder some other people on the ground. He stormed away from the dead corpses of the Jedi after taking their lightsabers. Vader set the vessel to detonate, and took his fighter down to the surface as the Jedi ship exploded behind him. The Sith apprentice sped down towards the coordinates listed previously from the officer on the destroyer he came from. There was a former outpost on the planet, one that belonged to the Jedi eons ago, long before the formation of the Republic, and thousands of years before the Jedi ever found their way to Coruscant. The outpost was on the outer rim world of Vahal. He left the Jedi weapons inside of his starship and walked out, looking for the surviving Jedi and their hidden path. His cape fluttered behind him as he slipped through the thin forest. Vader's eyes searched the fog and he raised his arm. The Force found his way from his hands and cleared part of the mist that covered the abandoned outpost. He looked at the glorious building, or what once was, now covered in moss. He walked forward, crushing plants, sticks, and anything in the way as he stepped towards the building. He stopped outside of it, looking through the fog as he turned back, seeing it covering his approach to this location. Vader thought nothing of it, but decided to carry on, walking towards the door and using the Force to break it open. The rusted hinges forced the door to crash across the floor in an echoing boom. Vader stepped in, grabbing his lightsaber off of his belt, and called out, telling the Jedi to reveal themselves, promising to them a painless death. He scanned the dark room, one that seemingly grew darker as he entered. Vader was confused, but he assumed it to be nothing again. The further into the building he went with his booming footsteps, he called attention to himself as he entered different rooms but also found no one and nothing, leaving him to feel disappointed. As Vader walked around, he traced steps that were relatively familiar. Most Jedi temples or outposts had very similar layouts, so he could really locate everything he wanted to very quickly, though he was only really here for Jedi of the present. He walked through the back side of the outpost and out to the other side, and he found a small courtyard. There again was nothing. This left the Dark Lord confused, so he turned back in and walked into the building. The towering statues called attention to relics of the past, so he decided to walk into the archives. Typically, those associated with the secret path would access the archives and carry knowledge with them to new locations. The database of this temple or outpost would inform him of their secrets or of their last activation from others that opened them up. Vader toyed around with the mechanics of the archives for about an hour or so, not really finding any way to activate the technology. It was very rudimentary, to put it best. He had found a generator within the building, but it wasn't able to be activated by simply finding a switch. Unlike most ancient technology with the Jedi, this was an energy sucker, and it didn't harbor any energy. It seemed that the ancient sect of the Jedi Order had found a way to harvest the Force for their own use. But from what he could tell, they didn't use it for negativity. They used it so that everything they were a part of was a part of the Force. Through this light generator, if you will, the Jedi were able to be surrounded by a building that was completely lit and powered by the Force itself. As Vader was strolling around from side to side, trying to activate the archives, he found a map of the galaxy, or what was known to the Jedi at the time of this temple's construction. They had a path that came directly from Ahsoka, a location Anakin had only heard about in legend, and from his training on Coruscant. Obi-Wan had always spoken fondly about the birthplace of the Jedi Order and his own desire to eventually visit it, but he never did. These fond memories for Anakin became nightmares for Vader, something to cringe at for the belligerent placement inside of his head. Vader eventually came to the conclusion that no one was going to be able to access this temple, not even Jedi of the present era. It took him forever to figure it out, and the fact that there was no trace of sentient interaction within this facility, it only proved to him that the Jedi likely were using this as a place of transit, one place to go to and leave immediately after. What he didn't know is some pirates intended on knocking off the Jedi he already killed. In the years since the collapse of the Jedi Order, the black market had a huge influx of lightsabers before they eventually dried up. Killing a Jedi was never easy, so selling the weapon of the Jedi was something that came with a lot of profit for whoever was selling. These pirates knew the Jedi were desperate. What Vader didn't know is the pirates had scavenged the vessel he destroyed and abandoned it, while he was down here searching for the hidden path. Now that he hadn't found anything, he decided to venture into the courtyard again. He had no interest in opening up any of the physical books inside this temple. Vader had his master's knowledge, and like Dooku and Maul before him, his trust in his master couldn't be understated. As he exited the outpost itself, he walked towards the courtyard he had eyed earlier. He stepped through the rubble of the Order of Past. He wondered to himself, why did they ever abandon this location? Before he could come to a conclusion, there was a terrible shriek in the distance. A creature of incredible size must have inhabited this land, which then led Vader to question everything. Why would the Jedi fear it? He didn't fear the creature himself. Surely, the Jedi must have fallen out of balance with the land here. Despite the answers for this not being revealed anywhere near him, he decided to move on, where in the middle of the courtyard, filled to the brim with grass, moss, weeds, and numerous other plants that covered what was likely a solid stone floor, he found something. Vader looked at a cylindrical boulder that sat idly in the middle of the yard. He paced around it, scanning the environment around just to be sure. Maybe he wasn't afraid of the creature in the distance, but no one could ever be too safe. Vader walked up to what he believed to be a seeing stone. As a metallic hand glided above it, he could tell that it wasn't that. This was something else, something deeper. Vader knelt down and pressed his hand down on top of it out of curiosity. He felt a rising from within his skin. There was a slight lag due to his metallic limbs, running a slight interference for him and the purity of the Force inside of the monument. As Vader felt the stone, his heart rate sped up, and he was transported to a time distant from him. He saw the Jedi of the past, similar to the Order he had destroyed. They'd fallen out of balance with their environment, and with themselves, from their ranks, there was a traitor, like Anakin. But this time, a believer. The Jedi needed change. They were the change for the galaxy, but they had been here on Valhalla for centuries. The Jedi Knight of the outpost gathered their brethren into the courtyard, speaking to them delicately and pressing them to trust in their mind. From behind the young Jedi Knight, the council of the outpost walked out. Unlike Anakin's own former order, these Jedi were three: one Grand Master, one Master of the Order, and one Master of Harmony. These three stepped down and watched their brothers and sisters gather around the believer. Anakin could not decipher the young Jedi's name or who they were or what they looked like, but they were brave, and they were wise beyond their years. The masters of the council sat down and listened to them, as they proclaimed a future for their order. The Jedi had journeyed far into their core, and they had found a planet by the name of Tython. In the year 20,000 BBY, the Jedi had assisted a great many people here in the Outer Rim. Vader watched them. The believer addressed their own concerns with this decision, and what could happen if they went far beyond their placement here in the Outer Rim. They believed that abandoning the Outer Rim could have long unforeseen effects, but thanks to scouts located in what would eventually be called the Galactic Core, the Jedi had a responsibility to bring order to the rest of the galaxy. The Grand Master, an Elder Marilyn, who like her peers on the council donned pure white robes, ones that as Anakin watched, he saw the rest of the Order shared. Over her neck was a golden sleeve that slipped across it, down to her chest. She looked to her brothers and sisters and rose, stepping to the believer and telling them that if they believed this was best for the Order, then they should oblige. It could not be understated. The Jedi had done their job in the Outer Rim. It was time to heal the rest of the galaxy. As they are the change, they must themselves be it. Her hand landed firmly on the believer's shoulder and told them that she trusted their judgment, just as she did the rest of their brothers and sisters. The Grand Master gestured forward towards the Memory Stone, as she called to it, and told them to gather closely, so that they could imprint their legacy for the Jedi of the future, so that they may return and find their balance here. Vader stumbled backwards out of the vision, the memory. Despite never actually being present, he could feel himself losing it. He felt the Grand Master's warmth and compassion. Anakin never truly got a grasp of who the believer was, but the way the vision had manifested itself was to show that the believer could be anyone. They did not have to be young or old. They did not have to be identified by any one attribute. The believer could be anyone, and Anakin stumbled. He looked over his shoulder, and he slipped a few words out of his mouth, and they met the modulator on his mask, and he asked himself aloud, the Jedi saved the Outer Rim? They never abandoned the people out of spite. They never betrayed the Outer Rim. The Jedi were good? Vader sat idly in disbelief. A few tears slipped down his eyes even. It couldn't be real. Why did they never come back? And the answer wasn't as simple as he hoped it would be. It never would be with things like this. But the truth is, war consumed the galaxy. They were consumed, and when they tried to come back, the galaxy had moved on. Criminal rings formed, and the Jedi were no longer in control of the destiny of the multitude of others. Destiny. Their fall from grace was never a choice. The times had changed without them. The original message born again and lost throughout the centuries. For an order of 25,000 years, they had maintained a message, and while it may have been politicized upon Anakin's birth, it was still a message of hope, peace, and justice. Vader, outside of Anakin, didn't want to believe this to be true, so he placed his hand back on the memory stone, and the world shifted again. Instead of seeing bright pageantry of the location, he found a decrepit master return. It was a Jedi wearing golden robes, an elder man. He stepped towards the courtyard and stopped. He asked Anakin if he had finally seen all the stars in the galaxy. Silence filled the courtyard. The elder man continued to pace around. His hair was long and it flowed in the wind. Each step the Jedi Master took came with discomfort. Following each swaying step, he stopped to turn to face Anakin again, asking him what his mother would think. Vader twisted around but saw no one, and when he turned back, a shadowy figure stepped out from his own presence. The voice was contorted, broken even. They told the Jedi Master that she wouldn't care. None of it mattered. The Master responded with shame, sitting down and looking over to the individual. He told them that their mother had such hope and joy in her eyes. She knew that the Jedi would take care of them. And then what had become of her child? Starting a crime ring in the Outer Rim? Really? Helping the evil Hutts get their foot in the door so they could start slavery. Why? Did the power or the credits give them something worth boasting about? Everyone who ever loved that individual had forgotten them. The individual responded quickly, but almost shamefully, but the Master hadn't forgotten. The Jedi shook his head and told the student that their fall from grace was devastating. A lightsaber ignited, red in color, and charged forward. Anakin cried out, telling the individual to stop, but they didn't. Their blade crossed through the Master's chest, but they didn't die. They looked over and shamefully told the Jedi of what this location was, referring to it as ancient, being several thousand years old, and yet the student had desecrated it with their impure spirit. What good would that do? The Master walked away, and the enraged child turned around with fury, demanding to know why or how this was possible. The Jedi Master turned back, standing straighter and twisting their head. He told the disobedient child that the Force was more than just power. The Jedi way was more than just political or social impact. It was a core belief in the good of the galaxy. It was a decision to be better not for themselves, but for the betterment of others. He looked down sadly and expressed that he knew they would try and desecrate this beautiful location. It's why they would stay here until they died. An explosion ripped through the air in the distance. The young fallen Jedi cried out in anger, rushing towards the Master and trying to kill them, but instead ripping through stone and statue. The Master told the young Jedi that in their failure to understand, they lost everything. In their failure to conceptualize what being a Jedi was truly about, their heart was flawed. But nothing is forever. Their time spent here for the rest of their life could be used to reconcile with themselves, while the Jedi tried to stop the rise of the Hutt cartel and a divided galaxy. The Master apologized, because it never should have come to this. But they bowed, and the student raged forward, missing the final strike as their Master returned home to Tython, after using a force projection so that he could die in peace. Before Vader woke up, a voice crawled over his shoulders and asked him if he was happy. He looked back into his mother's eyes and jolted backwards. What was happening here? Another voice called out, a deeper one, asking if he had finally seen all the stars in the galaxy. Master Qui-Gon? Another voice ripped through time and space, asking if he was proud of himself, the same way he had been. Obi-Wan? Another voice asked if he was who he had become, if he was the same person under that mask. Ahsoka? The last voice sent chills down his body, and asked him if he found happiness with all he desired to conquer. He didn't need to say her name. She had seen the worst of him, and she had died believing that the best of him would return. He looked at each of them who physically appeared. His skin and hands had returned. Anakin hadn't realized it, but through all of these activations of the Memory Stone, he had been here inside of his own old body. He scanned their disappointed and even despondent faces. They watched him with shame as he tried to rectify his decisions. But how could he tell Shmi that he murdered children in her name? How could he tell Padme that he slaughtered younglings in her name? Or that he betrayed everything Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan believed he would be? Or that Ahsoka died because he trusted the wrong person? At this point, Anakin believing that Ahsoka had died on that moon, where Jesse and the 332nd were found dead. He tried to apologize, and in one swift voice, they all collectively told him not to apologize for his past, but to write his future. Vader was flung backwards and he looked around. As he did, the ground rumbled, and he searched for his lightsaber, but he couldn't find it. He didn't realize he had fallen on it. The creature that had shrieked in the distance moved a little closer, and its massive head slipped through the fog and searched Vader's soul. The animal, like the Jedi of past, present, and future, were yearning for the light, but so little of it existed anymore. Almost on instinct, Vader's hand reached out and he placed his hand on the head of the animal, feeling its thoughts as if they were from the minds of the Jedi past. But this animal had been alive just as long as the Jedi, a several thousand-year-old monster that was as sweet as a Merquow. The animal's thoughts filled Vader's mind as he released his touch and it vanished back into the fog. How could he fix this? As he was sitting in his silence, he got a communication from his officer. They located the healer, or former Inquisitor Barriss Offee. They were going to send the Force Sister to deal with it. The officer had been informed by Vader in the past to tell him if this ever came up, and he would decide if he wanted to deal with it himself at that moment. Now the opportunity sat before Vader, and he would. Barriss and Vader had their rivalry from their past lives, and it was time for Vader to see if he actually wanted to relinquish his hatred. The Force was testing him with someone that would channel more anger than not. Vader was also eventually relieved to see that his starship was not destroyed in the explosion from the Memory Stone vision. Vader would eventually land on the icy tundra where he would track the coordinates given, and as he approached the camp, his memories of the past filled his mind. He looked to Barriss. She had aged considerably in the years since she abandoned the Inquisitorious path, but he knew why that was. It was part of the reason the Jedi refused to use Force Heal. The Force gives, but it also takes. The natural order of balance. For Barriss, she had used her guilt as a quest to heal others. They stood on opposing hills, and Barriss naturally assumed that Vader was here to kill her, which in all fairness, why else would he be here? Despite her calm and collected demeanor, she was planning on luring whoever found her into the cave behind her. So she started with a statement meant to piss Vader off, which worked, telling him that Anakin would have never applauded him now, and that the Skywalker she knew would have defaced that hellish mask without a hint of hesitation. Vader didn't really appreciate that, at all. He wanted to get angry, but what good would that do for him now? He'd be stuck with nothing but his fury again. No loyalties or friends, just slavery to Palpatine. He tossed his lightsaber out into the snow and it stuck into the ground. Barriss folded her arms, and he told her that, like her, there had been a truth that revealed itself to him. He wished for the opportunity to reconcile and potentially find new direction for their own relationship. She waved her hand over and he followed, walking past his lightsaber. She invited him into her warm and cozy tent, asking him to sit, which looked as awkward as it sounded. They spoke for what felt like days, but truthfully amounted to a few hours long. It passed by quickly though, as Vader told her that he had fallen too far, and he wished to reconcile with his past, with the Jedi, and hopefully with her. He pointed her in the direction of Ahal, and expressed his wishes to restart the dying order. He informed her of his recent fight with Kenobi, and even the embarrassment of such a loss, but without it, he may have never been inclined to view things so differently. Despite trying to forget about the duel, there was a weight from the event that hung on his shoulders, one that dominated his mind like a plague. Barriss understood. She patted his shoulder gently, and understood. They were classmates at the temple. She, a year younger than he. She had always tried to understand. Both of them had acted out of place, and they both needed each other if they wanted to rectify their mistakes. Barriss's actions leading to widespread distrust in the Jedi, and Anakin's actions destroying what they had left. They could work together, and they could find their future through unity. Vader addressed the small issue though. suggesting that she be his confidant. Being that he was Palpatine's dog, he could use what influence he had to help her and the future of the Jedi. She asked if this was a rebel movement, and he shook his head. He believed in the Jedi way. Only now had he seen the errors of his own path. Barriss smiled, handing him a cup of tea she had made, and insisting that he drink it. The removal of his helmet followed, and the sight she saw broke her heart truthfully. But they would work together now. She asked for a codename, and he told her Destiny. She looked a little confused, and he chuckled to himself. As a boy, he never named his pod racer, but after his victory at 9 years old, they named his pod racer Destiny's Favorite. Sidious wouldn't ever connect those dots. Anakin only knew about it because of his obsession for pod racing when he was a youngling. In the Boonta Eve Classic following his victory, they announced his racer as Destiny's Favorite, and they expressed shame in Skywalker not making another appearance. So Anakin told her that his codename would be Destiny, and she quite liked it. Despite this rudimentary start to a new Jedi Order being just that, the location of Valhalla had been lost to time. It was merely a coincidence that the Jedi had found it, and those poor souls slaughtered by Vader were simply tools. Perhaps it was their own destiny that led Vader to the ancient world of the Jedi so that this could be started. That being said, Barriss decided to inform some of her Jedi contacts, including the young man she saved from Lynn when she was still an Inquisitor of this location. Vader was able to broker a deal with his least favorite person in the galaxy, Hondo Ohnaka, to help him ferry supplies to the planet. Essentially, Vader would give Hondo information on Imperial supply ships, going out to Imperial troopers on the frontier, and the deal was, Hondo could keep half of it, which he never did. Hondo always kept like 65% of the goods, which was fine. There weren't enough Jedi or even people on Valhalla that really needed the supplies as it was, but whatever they got was super beneficial. Barriss didn't move to the planet full time. The aging Quinlan Vos did, accompanied by Ventress and some other Path members. The outpost wasn't as big as Tanu by any means, but it was large enough to host hundreds of people. With the supplies from Hondo, they'd be able to create camps if need be. The issue is, all the transports intercepted by Destiny's contacts were relatively random, so some would contain firearms, other would have rations, building supplies, or even random necessities. Vader didn't look too deep into these shipments because he didn't care. If it was all weapons, then that would pay off Hondo. If it was all food, then it would benefit the people of the outpost, which Vader was now calling Hope. Vader's time inside the Empire continued to rapidly shift, as Destiny became a focal point for the ISB. Though because of Vader's importance to the Emperor, he wasn't ever considered to be a target. However, Vader was very intelligent with this play, because he frequently killed Imperial officers before Destiny came online, so he started to frame it like it was the disgruntled officer who feared Vader, which led the ISB to hunting and taking down individuals completely separated from the codename. While it all looked good, the truth is it wasn't. The path was rapidly shrinking, and despite Vader's help now, the rebirth of the Jedi Order was going terribly. Barriss had abandoned her post on the tundra to search for Obi-Wan, but that was an impossible task. Finding Jedi was hard enough. Finding a hermit who dogged Vader and vanished into the shadows would be impossible. So that left Barriss using her long-established contacts to help. The two most influential and important members of this operation were Vader and Barriss. Without each other, none of this would be possible. Quinlan and Asajj were solid thirds, though. It was a split thing between the lovers. Ventress may have been a toughie, but she was a real softie when it mattered. She helped take care of the people who were fresh off the transports brought to Valhalla. In his journeys as Vader, he had to break his cover by killing off an Inquisitor or two along the way, one of which being the Fourth Sister, which he had no pride in doing, and the other Inquisitor was Merrick. But Vader used his breaking of cover to send new people to Hope Outpost. For years, this would continue on without any hitch in the road. The deal with Hondo almost provided a stint in their progress, but he dealt with the loose ends whenever they came. Vader on his own personal journeys came to Valhalla when he could, to look at the people. He didn't go very close, as to not scare the children, but the Memory Stone, which was beaming with light, was a vibrant reminder of what the Jedi did for people. The outpost was beautifully lit with the Force, and the creature, whose name was found to be in the archives by Ventress, to be Ashashi Ikimono. The creature's name stemmed from the belief that she was a gentle creature, something the Jedi of the Ancient Era believed was very true. Yasashi was very kind, despite towering over the outpost and being larger than any star cruiser that landed on Valhalla. On his visits, Anakin, Ventress, Quinlan, and Barriss would speak extensively on the progress of the secretive Jedi Order. All three of those who spent the most time on the planet told him about the reactions from the people who were new here. Anakin had found that they were so successful due to Destiny's inside work that they needed to add encampments around the outpost itself. The rooms were filled with families first, and then individuals, so there were so many that they had to expand it. It was truly beautiful. Something that Anakin hadn't done intentionally was bring a new excitement to the Order. Despite the focus of the Jedi and of Vader on bringing in new members of the Path and giving them a home, they had also given new life to individuals wanting to join the Order itself. See, the teens, children, and adults of the Hope Outpost wanted to be like the Jedi. Not all of them, but in seeing what the Jedi could be, what they truly were at their core, there was belief in what they were capable of. On one of his many visits to Valhalla, Anakin decided that he had hidden the shadows long enough, and he had braved himself for conversations with those he had saved. While he was their quote-unquote savior, he also couldn't help but feel like this was his fault, because in the end, it was. He displaced the Jedi by betraying Windu years ago. In the same way that he was hiding as not to frighten children, it also felt like within his heart that he was hiding from his responsibility. So during the specific visit, he asked that Barriss walk him just in case he needed his helmet or some help. The two of them walked together through the courtyard, and Anakin felt the warmth of the sun on his skin, and it was rewarding. Hope Outpost, once covered by fog and mist, was now only protected by it. Hope was initially hidden because it was forgotten, but its natural connection to the Force allowed the elements surrounding her to be her protectors, just like Yashashi. She was naturally aggressive, but this temple was the home of those who were kind and caring towards her as well. Anakin walked through the crowds. The temple grounds were cleaned up, and they were beautiful. Anakin knelt to talk to children and tell them to have hope, to keep their heads up. He would speak to their parents, inspired to fight back, or to rise up, and he told them to quell their frustration. Their time would come. He promised it. Despite him not using his helmet, it was like the light of the Force was healing not just his soul, but his heart, his body, and his mind. The impurity of the Sith was a curse, and the poison was being swept from his veins. It was here, at Hope, that he realized his family was always the Jedi. Looking back at his longtime ally, Barriss, he realized that friends come in all shapes and forms. Maybe they aren't what you think you need, but what you actually need. Anakin always needed Barriss as a friend as a Jedi, but never knew it. They eventually ended their conversations and Anakin returned to being Destiny inside Imperial ranks. Despite everything Anakin did to hide his loyalty to the Jedi, Sidious had caught on, and he was waiting for Skywalker upon his return. The Dark Lord of the Sith caught Vader in a surprise. He walked with him first, which put Anakin on edge immediately. Sidious spoke to Vader, but he, without saying it, knew that he had seen throughout the years since Vader's second duel with Kenobi that there had been a change. Vader dedicated his loyalty to Palpatine verbally, but he emotionally had checked out, and had failed to uphold his loyalty to the Empire. Sidious had seen it, and instead of waiting until Vader could expose it himself, Palpatine forced the ISB to hide their efforts by targeting Imperial officers that were expendable. Some of them were killed off, others were placed in new positions. Main point being, Sidious knew for most of the time, as he had been tracking Vader's movement, no stone could be unturned. As they were walking and talking, the Imperial fleet was sent to Valhalla, and there'd be no turning back. Sidious planned to make sure that Vader watched his friends die before his very eyes. Palpatine planned to make this entire scenario work really well in his favor, so he dragged on about Imperial-related duties, things to pique Destiny's interest in the context of his little rebel movement, but bore Vader at the same time. Sidious wanted his failed student to see this information as seeds for the path, but in reality, it wouldn't do him any well. It was a nice balance between interesting and boring for Vader. As they got closer to Valhalla, Sidious brought Vader into a separate room after boring his mind. It was here where he told Vader that he was lied to. This entire trip was a deception. Vader twisted his head, and as he did, electricity filled his body. Palpatine mocked his student, who fell to the ground, telling him that he knew of Destiny. He knew how he tried to restart the Jedi Order, and that he had been running this operation behind his back for years. He told Vader that this order would die, and then he would too, join the long list of failed apprentices under his name. Vader grabbed his lightsaber and ignited it. He told Sidious to stay back, as he stood shakily to his feet, and Sidious laughed at him, sending electricity at his student. Sidious then shot everything he had at the student, and Vader's body was electrocuted as he shook. Sidious's lightsaber ignited and was driven down. In one moment, with true solidarity with the Force, Vader raised his hand. He lifted his lightsaber straight up into Sidious's defenseless pose, driving the weapon through his heart and dropping the Emperor. Vader turned on a heel and marched to the bridge of the ship, killing stormtroopers and officers on his approach. When he arrived, the ship shuddered as it exited hyperspace. He demanded that the deckhands stop what they were doing, and they all turned to fire on him. Vader launched his lightsaber down the room, killing officers and deckhands alike. As he was commencing the slaughter of the bridge, he could hear turbo lasers fire. He couldn't believe it himself. He was worried for Hondo Anaka. Vader tried to communicate with the other ships, telling them to cease their fire, but they had been informed by Palpatine that he was a traitor. Hondo's pirate fleet, one that had grown considerably since his alliance with Destiny, was under heavy fire. Vader couldn't control the entire deck at the same time, so he looked to the two Star Destroyers flanking him. There was only one thing to do. There was only one right way to save everyone. He stepped to the front of the bridge and removed his helmet, placing it on the windowsill. His bare eyes felt the air. His skin was scarred, but some scars would be healed today. He twisted his arms out and closed his eyes. Blaster fire filled the air as Hondo's pirates tried to find their escape route. Vader's hands stretched out as far as they could, and he could feel the Force slip through his body and out through the stubs of his arms. The Force passed through the circuitry and the mechanical pieces before finding their home around the exterior of each of the Star Destroyers. His face scrunched up, and he held his breath, pulling in the ships. As he did, the veins on his neck protruded, and he called upon himself to light their darkest hour. It was time for the change. It was time for the beginning of the Jedi, but it was also time for the end of the Sith. Vader's hands pulled both Star Destroyers. Even with their engines on, he pulled them towards him. He felt the crews inside both ships try to reverse or course correct, but it didn't work. Vader, no, not Vader anymore. Anakin Skywalker was one with the Force, and the Force was with him. He did not release these ships, and as he watched Hondo flee to the surface, he could sense purity going down with him. Under his feet, the ship he stood on, the one that housed the last of the Sith, including his dead master, started to buckle. He closed his eyes once more, and as he had by the memory stone of Valhalla, he could see those he loved most, but this time, he could see them welcoming him, to them. The warm embrace was the light he went to, the one he was called to be with. All of it felt so freeing, and with the snap of an explosion, life was taken out of his hands and given to the galaxy. The three destroyers collided, sending out a ripple explosion, detonating the vessels determined to destroy the path. On the surface, people could see with their bare eyes the destruction of the Imperial fleet, and they started to worry. Their worry would vanish, but that wasn't because of the destruction. Two individuals who hadn't had their chance to visit Hope or meet Destiny would arrive with Hondo Anaka. Hondo would run into Old Ben inside of a cantina on Mos Espa, and the one who went by Fulcrum had finally gotten her chance to visit Hope after all this time. It would be in this reunion between Ahsoka and Obi-Wan that they would learn who Anakin had truly become, and in Anakin's final moments, he had given them the gift of rebirth. The Jedi Order was alive, it was breathing, and it was coming back to life thanks to Skywalker. While there was the initial desire to run from Valhalla, what Anakin had done was save her. By this point, the last of the Inquisitors were dead. The Sith were destroyed, and the Empire, while, sure, knowing about Valhalla, would never find the outpost. Hope was protected by the nature around it, due to being powered by the Force. Whether that be Yasashi, the Mist, or the Jedi themselves, there'd be no way for the Empire to find the hidden path or the Hope outpost. But the Empire had bigger foes to worry about. When Anakin became one with the Force, he also became guardian of the world between worlds, an overseer of time. As all goes, the Force comes with balance, and those who are evil disrupt it. Anakin had brought balance, but still, much would need to be done. As he reunited with Qui-Gon in the world between worlds, he and his master walked along the purified walkways of the desolate but fulfilled land. Anakin had his body back. He was human again. he was whole, spiritually, physically, and mentally. The two of them walked over to the portals to see what would become of the galaxy he had left behind. Imperial forces would turn on each other. Thrawn, while being at the head of operations for Imperial military strategy, would suffer under the foolish behavior of Imperial officers. Moff Tarkin took control following the destruction over Valhalla, which was described as a supernatural event. The ISB would be used to hunt down enemies or rivals of Tarkin, until another Moff killed him point blank with a shot to the cranium. Chaos then unfolded after that. The Senate had no power before Palpatine's death, and after it, they were reduced to nothing but mindless drones that debated over nothingness, with no grasp on power. Tarkin's death would upset everything. Thrawn tried to rectify what had been started, but the Empire turned in on itself. The conflict with rebel cells became trauma for grunts on the frontier planets, while the real fight for the Empire was a core-bred fight for control over who had the most power in the galaxy. Thrawn was able to secure himself victories in the core against Imperial forces, and establish his feat as the head fleet in the galaxy for the true Empire, as they called themselves. But that lasted for only so long, as Thrawn was killed by one of his own deckhands trying to gain more power. And then, of course, after Thrawn was gone, it was total chaos. Years of civil war would unfold, but through the mist of darkness, the rising light came from the Jedi, led by heroes and even villains of a long time gone. Barriss, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, Quinlan, Asajj, and many more. The Jedi were the light of the galaxy, and they were coming with change. During the early days of the Imperial Civil War, there were Jedi who assisted on the frontier, but that eventually changed. Skywalker's reborn order was full of heart, and dedicated unlike ever before. They knew what their mission statement was, and they intended to follow it. The Memory Stone would remain an inspiration for generations to come, and thanks to Anakin's work in saving the young, there was a future generation of Jedi born already, and ready to serve selflessly. While he couldn't be there for it himself, he did get to rejoice in what he saw. His children became Jedi. His former master fulfilled himself. His former pupil found her home. They were all one. They could create a better future for the galaxy, and Anakin smiled knowing that forever would his change be inspiration to those who called Hope Outpost their home. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Ezra Wells, Darth Maelstrom, Ozpin, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Root36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Galava Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granite D. Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlinger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Naguin, Sense Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Youngling Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Lakes Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, Mammoth 3 First Names, Darkseid46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting our channel, smash that like button. The giveaway is down below. Go check it out if you want to win a Star Destroyer. Let's talk about this story. So the whole lore on Valhalla is meant to be kind of like an echoing of Anakin and his time. It's kind of meant to be a big parallel with kind of give something new and unique and original to the story. I wanted to use Valhalla as like this really crucial point for Anakin's journey. Without it, it would have never come. And on it, he sees someone that he should have been or could have been, the believer, and then he sees someone that he was, which is the individual that ends up staying on Valhalla and dying there. So I wanted his home with the Jedi to be fulfilled through something that he wouldn't have found naturally, something that was found by destiny. The entire idea of destiny is very much so the anchor of the story. The kind of irony in the title here is that he is in full belief that he's starting this thing secretly. I wanted Palpatine to be in control of the entire situation, but be waiting for Vader to build it up. Palpatine's all about this big defeat, and it always doesn't work for him. Endor, Exegol, even in Legends, he has this huge thing where he's like, I'm gonna do a thing, and it doesn't work. And then lastly, the animation. I hope you guys enjoyed that animation. Got a ton of different animations going. I think there's like 3 or 4 working right now. They just take a lot of time, but I hope you all enjoyed that. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.